Good afternoon, Baltimore, and welcome back to City Voters Live podcast. I'm your host, Desmond Stinney, back for episode 29, our continuing coverage of the opioid crisis occurring here in Baltimore City. We've had part one discussing overdoses. This is part two. Today we'll be discussing addiction. We'll talk about some common misconceptions, some interesting studies that have been done, and discuss some of the drivers of addiction and hear some stories personal stories about addiction. So please stay with us, and we'll be right back after we pay some bills.
Accident victims like you deserve better. A husband and wife were rear-ended, and insurance offered them $10,000. We litigated the case and got them $375,000. Qualified expert attorneys can get you more. Call Zirkin and Smerling today.
And we're back. Thank you for joining and continuing to watch City Voters Live podcast. Kelly, how are you today?
I am well. Thank you for having me here again.
And
Good to be with you
as well. It's been a couple of weeks, but we're back. And today we're going to be talking about addiction. And the first thing I want to talk about is that as we started to talk about this series, we started to talk about all the aspects, and of course, which we're covering in the multiple parts that we're going to be doing. Overdoses still is on Facebook for anybody that didn't see part one of this. Overdoses is on our group, so feel free to watch that. Today we're going to be discussing addiction, and I tell you, you enlightened me about a TED Talk that had taken place it was some time ago, but it was really helpful for me to watch that. And I think some of the things that was discussed in that TED Talk really helped me understand, because prior to seeing that TED Talk, I always thought about addiction as more of a physical thing. If you did heroin, you were going to get physically dependent on it, and you could become an addict. And that TED Talk really opened my eyes. That's just not the case.
I was impressed with the impact it had on you and opening the door as to what are some of the underlying causes. What is at the root of addiction for so many people?
And it certainly did. And let me thank you again, and let me let the viewers know that we are going to post a link to that TED Talk with this episode of addiction once it's posted onto our Baltimore City Voters Facebook group. And I tell you that the main thing that talk did for me is it helped me not so much focus on the drug, the heroin, or whatever drug people are addicted to. What it helped me focus on is the human, right, and the person. And I don't want to spoil this for folks that are going to look at this TED Talk. And if you've already seen it, then you already know what I'm about to say. But the thing that grabbed me is when Johan Hari is the speaker in this talk, when he said that the addiction is highly dependent on the fact that folks have lost bonds, and they become almost detached or isolated, and a lot of times they have this overall feeling of not wanting to be present in their own lives.
Right. Isolation, among many things. And neuroscience has now told us that every brain has the capacity to become addicted.
It hit me on such a human level, because all this time I've been focusing on this substance,
the drug,
and really I needed to be focused on the human, and why this human is feeling like they don't want to be present in their own life. How do we get there? And we think when I started to focus on that, it really started to help me ask better questions.
Wow.
Right. And so today I'm going to be here with you because you run Love in the Trenches. And for those who didn't see part 1 of the series, please take us through what Love in the Trenches is and what it does so they understand why I'm looking to you for this expertise.
Thank you. Love in the Trenches is an organization that supports parents who have a child who is suffering an active addiction or recovery. And we're here for families whose children have died from overdose. We also support siblings in both of those capacities. And we also do a lot of community outreach as an overdose response program in terms of connecting with everyone in the whole state of Maryland with Narcan distribution and training. And really, I think what we're trying to do at the essence of this is talk exactly about what you just brought up, and that is stigma, love, what is behind it. We're trying to help families heal. And I want to say that one of the things I just realized about that in terms of our support groups for parents whose children have died from overdose is they become messengers. Those parents go out into the community and talk about their experience and their child's addiction and what was at the root of that. So it is really imperative that we remember what an important voice those parents still have while we continue to nurture and support and buoy the parents who are really in the trenches with kids who are, and when I say kids, your child could be a 45-year-old man, but if your child is suffering from addiction, we're here for you.
And as you mentioned, a child is a child at any age, right? And it's not natural for a child to pass first, right? So at no point will my children ever stop being my children, right? So it's good to hear that, regardless of which, there's support out there and assistance for those who, in those families, and whether you're mother, father, sister, uncle, brother. And I think everyone, including myself, we all have a personal story, when it comes to addiction. And I think this series and this new relationship that we've forged is really helping me understand how to be I'll just say a better family member than I've been. And
wow.
So, and I think a lot of this is covered in the talk that we referenced, the TED Talk that we referenced earlier, how I guess it's natural to feel the way some folks feel, or how you feel when you're dealing with addiction. It's a roller coaster of emotions, but understanding when you take yourself out of being the first person you're concerned with, and you really put the person who's struggling, and what this is really helped me understand is the struggle that they're in with the substance. It's their struggle. It's not mine.
It is. But when we understand the underlying causes for many, many people, it really changes the way we look at not just the person, but the problem. And I think that, as you said earlier, is a way of addressing the epidemic,
right,
by shifting the perspective
and the perception.
And right. The perception, right? Absolutely.
It is completely helping me. I can tell you that if I walked out of my door today and saw someone who was in the throes of substance use disorder, my mindset today is a lot different than when this series started.
Really?
And that's what, absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. And that's why we're doing this 5-part series is to see if anyone else is in the same place that I was in, that we can get them to another place. Because as we talked about in part 1, this is an all hands on deck moment. 6,000 lives, right? 6,000 lives. That's a lot of human beings. So we want to talk about understanding now that I should not be focused on the chemical, and this chemical creating these hooks. And as the chemical, if it gets its hooks into you, you're going to have problems. But understanding that whatever problems that made the person susceptible to falling into substance use disorder, that existed before the drug.
Right.
Right.
So as long as the conversation stays on heroin or fentanyl or alcohol, fill in the blank with, the drug, we forget. Our eye is not really on the rooted problem, and the problem is the person.
And today we're going to focus on the human aspect.
Today we're going to focus on the human aspect.
Drivers of addiction. Help us understand it.
So in 2018, overdose death, I'm reading this, we found that more people died yearly than in the entire Vietnam War. And
which geographical? Are we talking about America, the U.S.?
Americans.
Americans, okay. In the United States.
In the United States,
right.
Yes.
So we're having a war every year. A terrible war. Like, that's one of the worst casualties.
We're immune to the phrase, the war on drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that phrase, the war on drugs, makes it look like we're in a war against the drugs. And while we are looking at the person, what is behind that? Is there trauma? Is there PTSD? Is there tremendous substance use in the home? Is there ADD and ADHD, which we know leads to impulsive behavior, which we were talking about earlier? And that likely leads to behavioral problems. And now you see where I'm going with that, right?
Right. Right. And at the end of the day, when you have situations such as trauma and, behavioral or psychological disorders, and all of those can cause you to want to detach.
Because there's shame attached.
Bonds, right? You break your bonds.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're isolated. And you naturally start trying to figure out how to cope.
Well, yeah. If someone starts to have a behavioral problem in school or in the home, is the school focused to say, I need to remember that how we address this has a lot to do with how the person takes it on, to your point about being comfortable, wanting to be relieved from not belonging or not. I love the way you said that. How did you say that before about the person looking for relief?
Oh, yeah. They're looking for an escape. They're looking for to cope.
Right.
Yeah.
I love the way you said that. My own child, who, as you know, died of an overdose from fentanyl, was a bright student. And probably, if I knew then what I know now, very ADD, very ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a teacher in the 5th grade who said, if a child had their name on the blackboard more than 3 times, they were immediately sent to the office. So if you act up, your name goes on the board.
Right.
And she called me in because his name was on the board. He was a real problem. His name kept going up on the board, and more than any other kid in the class. And we all sat together to talk about what was going on. And fortunately, a counselor in the situation said he feels out of control and scared because he has that, ADD thing, because he has that impulse problem.
Right.
He is controlling getting his name on the board. So he'll decide if he's getting sent to the office. And she tried an experiment and said, if you keep your name off the board, I'll let you have 15 extra minutes in the creative writers workshop. And computers had just come out then.
Right.
And it worked like a charm because they were quick to identify that impulsive behavior. He wasn't able to stop the negative behavior. He just had to control how he was feeling out of control about it and take the control from her deciding what was going to happen to him.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
We see that a lot in ADD, but you had such a great insight after you watched the TED Talk about isolation.
And which was and the talk about isolation in the TED Talk, and we're going to play a clip from that talk, and it's discussing one of the experiments that was done, and this one is called Rat Park, but it discusses not only is it discussing isolation, but it is also discussing when there's an alternative.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
How the outcomes are different.
Right.
So let's go ahead and play, that clip so we can better understand how isolation and socialization really play a part in this?
Get a rat and you put it in a cage and you give it 2 water bottles. One is just water and the other is water laced with either heroin or cocaine. If you do that, the rat will almost always prefer the drugged water and almost always kill itself quite quickly. So there you go, right? That's how we think it works. In the 70s, Professor Alexander comes along and he looks at this experiment and he noticed something. He said, we're putting the rat in an empty cage. It's got nothing to do except use these drugs. Let's try something a bit different. So Professor Alexander built a cage that he called Rat Park, which is basically heaven for rats, right? They've got loads of cheese, they've got loads of colored balls, they've got loads of tunnels. Crucially, they've got loads of friends, they can have loads of sex, and they've got both the water bottles, the normal water and the drugged water. But here's the fascinating thing. In Rat Park, they don't like the drugged water. They almost never use it. None of them ever use it compulsively. None of them ever overdose. You go from almost 100% overdose when they're isolated to 0% overdose when they have happy and connected lives.
And I mean, that's all you really need to see right there. Is when you're happy and connected, and you have a desire to remain present in your life, the results are completely different than when you're isolated and you're looking to cope and you're looking to escape.
Right.
And I mean, these conversations, that TED Talk, the more we speak, the more I research and read. I'm certainly going to be reading that Kanonis book at some point. The more it makes me vigilant. I was watching TV the other day, and a commercial came on. Of course, it's a solicitation by attorneys, and they're asking if you were incarcerated at, or I don't know if it's incarcerated because it's not really a jail, but if you were, I don't know the correct term for it, but if you were at Cheltenham or Hickey, right?
Oh.
And they're advertising about abuse victims, at those places. And one, obviously, it's heartbreaking because there's just so many people out there that have been abused that they think that they can capture them by placing a TV commercial. So you don't do that if you think it's 3 or 4 people out there, right? You put a commercial out there because you think there's a lot of them, and one or more may see that commercial and call you. So what that told me is the sheer volume of people that had been abused. And I immediately come to think about our conversations and say, how are those people coping?
Right.
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 Are any of them part of that 6,000 number? Are any of them at risk of becoming part of that 6,000
The answer
number?
is absolutely yes.
You think about other situations where people have been abused and how much shame they must be feeling about that abuse. And they're out here in the world every day. And how are they coping? How are they wanting to stay present in their own lives? And are they struggling?
And we talk about abuse. Kids abused in the care of others is a terrible thing.
Mm-hmm.
The commercial is to address a problem we all know about. But there is the part we don't know about. A coach could have caused tremendous humiliation to a child. You think about the Penn State
situation a few years back, right?
And parents didn't know.
Right.
A lot of the parents had no idea.
Right.
And yet you're suddenly knocked in such a way at an impressionable stage in your life, and
when you're supposed to be able to trust people,
right? And you carry around, I'm different, I'm not worthy, I'm ashamed,
right.
I'm disappointing someone,
right?
Right.
These drivers of addiction, and right. what is being done by these institutions who harmed all these children,
right?
Are they trying to locate them to see if they're okay?
And throwing money at the situation,
of course,
helping.
Yeah. Right. They have to, yeah.
I mean, you're going to throw money to be spent on recovery and therapy
and harm reduction programs
and support groups for families, so that families know how to speak the love the language of love in the trenches, if you will.
Oh, yeah. And those are things that I mean, that's all that is fantastic, which obviously is what it should be doing. But at the very least, are you trying to reach out? I mean, is the attorney the only person trying to are they the only ones trying to find these people? Like, why isn't anyone else trying to find them just to say, I just want to make sure you're okay. I know something horrible happened to you, right? Are you okay? Right. What can we do to make you okay so that you don't turn into someone who can't bear, that's what he said, can't bear to be present in their own life. Right.
Right. And identify in our school age children, knowing the markers of, I mean, it's common knowledge that impulsive behavior leads to impulsive behavior.
Right.
So if a young child is exhibiting these signs, whether you're in a private upscale school or unfortunately in an institutional setting,
right,
it should be even across the board that anyone who exhibits signs that are known to be hand in hand with impulsive behavior should also then be flagged for the potential of a substance use disorder. Would you think?
Yeah.
You would think.
Right.
So, because now you and I know if we had young children and their teachers were telling us that, because we know differently now, we would immediately become vigilant and start to have the conversations on the front end.
Oh, yeah. I'm lucky enough to be married to someone that's so on top of those things. I mean, that mama bear is not.
But there are a lot of mama bears who think they are on top of it.
But it's also a generation, a lot more. I mean, our kids are a little younger. So, but it's still out there. It's still happening, and the more that people are aware of, what to look for or who is potentially at risk is what you're talking about. Who are the folks that are potentially at risk, then we can keep a closer, closer eye, and make sure. Or do as much as you can. You can't never make sure, but you can do as much as you can to try to keep that train on the right track. But and the deeper we dive into this, the more I learn. But like I said, that with this particular topic that we're covering today, it really helped me refocus, not so much on the substance, the chemical, and my mind likes to think logically. It's, hey, this drug has this chemical. If you take that chemical is going to cause you to be physically dependent, and that's just how it works. But
it's not as easy as we're describing it, though. To your point about isolation, the child that has depression, or the child that has anxiety, the child that feels different for reasons they can't articulate.
Right.
It's not as easy as we're making it sound. It's not like you can identify
of course not.
the propensity to isolate and say, oh, I should get in front of that. But we do have to do so much better there.
Right.
We do have to take a look at the markers. Because you said earlier to me something about how when you said how we're weaned off of medication when it's prescribed medically.
Right. In the talk, they discussed if it was that simple as I made it, you have the chemical, it has the hook. If you do it, then he made a great point that everybody that went into a hospital and had a surgery or any type of procedure where you were administered these narcotics, and most of them, as he mentioned, are way better than anything you're going to find on the street. It's medical grade heroin, right? So why doesn't everyone come out of the hospital addicted? And I mean, there's, like as you're bringing up, in the hospital they make sure they wean you to make sure that you're not showing signs of addiction, or at least they do now. I don't know what they do.
They send you home with Narcan now.
Oh, right. Yeah.
If you've had a major surgery and you're sent home with some narcotics, they actually tend to add Narcan to the prescription. Not add it to the prescription in addition to.
Right. Yeah, but they successfully wean most people off.
Yes.
Coming out of medical facilities. So, it's not just about the drug. And my guess is it's a lot more about what's going on with the individual.
It always is.
Yeah. And we'll cover this in episodes later down the road as we talk more about, policy and leadership and things of that nature. It's just got to be more of a priority.
Absolutely.
It has to be more of a priority. We're talking right now just from a simple standpoint of just making sure that obviously, all first responders should be, at least ORPs, right? At least be able to respond to overdose events and things of that nature. But like I said, I don't want to put the cart too far ahead of the horse as we, want to stay focused today on this topic. But this addiction, we covered the drivers, but let's talk a little bit about the families and how, obviously we all have some level of experience with dealing with addiction, either family or close friends and things like that. But what can we do to help some family members that might be watching who are dealing with relatives or loved ones that are in the throes of substance use disorder?
It's a great question. And so the first thing you could do is come to our website where you can find a support group. Whether you're a sibling or a parent of a child in active addiction, in recovery, who you're worried about, our support groups, and if unfortunately, sadly, you've lost a child to overdose, come find us. Come find us, because we really want to change the conversation and talk about ways that we can work to eradicate the unbearable weight of powerlessness that families feel when loving a child suffering from an SUD. Find us at loveinthetrenches.org, and the response will be one of love. And we have a lot of, I would love to get Sean on your show so that she can talk about a lot of the things they discuss in the parents groups and the ways in which the support has really helped change the lives for some parents with kids that are suffering.
Well, we would love to have her. And coming up on the next part of this series is recovery, and I think we're going to be covering a lot about. Recovery. A lot of it's not generally the person suffering from the SUD that's just doing it by themselves. Yeah. It's usually a lot of their folks that love them are a part of that recovery process. And I'd love to have
it'd be great. And we have to also discuss that every family looks different. And you and I said this earlier too, before a little bit ago. It's not a one size fits all. Addiction is not.
Right.
And recovery and how different families do different things is not. We have to have the grace to acknowledge that it's not a one size fits all. So when policy or ways in which to address this, conversations start with, so what can we do about it? I think the first thing we want to say is everybody's different.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what works for one or two families isn't going to work for family number 3. Because that child came in with, as we said before, a dual diagnosis or a sense of isolation, whereas this guy maybe didn't. This child maybe had a football injury and actually loved the Percocet. So we have to stop making this a one size fits all. Again, to your point about it's the human.
And we're all here trying to have a human experience, right?
We are.
Well, I'll tell you, I feel like as just a person driving down the street, I'm looking at my surroundings differently, and part of that, it's just I guess I'm in my own. I guess I don't know if I'm allowed to use this, but I guess I'm in my own sort of grieving, right? Because when you hear 6,000 people are gone over this, that's a startling revelation. And
I love that you connect with that, though. That makes you connected to your fellow man, to your children are okay tonight, but you know someone else's children are not.
Yeah, we're not supposed to sleep as a village unless we know everybody's okay.
That's right.
Right. It's not, if every man was for themselves, I mean,
Right.
where would we be?
Right.
That's not what this is about. And to the extent that I can, to the extent that we can together, and to the extent that we can grow the coalition, we've got to get this to be priority number one.
Absolutely.
Right here in Baltimore City, because it is the number one thing. This is the worst humanitarian crisis that this city has faced.
Mm-hmm.
Right. We were up in arms about the murders, as we should have been.
Mm-hmm.
Too many lives are being lost
Mm-hmm.
on our streets to gun violence, and that was unacceptable. And there's been a lot to address that, as it should have been. And it's great to see where those numbers are going. And we have to applaud everyone that has taken a part in that. But this is what we got now.
Yep.
And it needs to be dealt with. And to the extent that we can, we're going to be doing it right here on City Voters Live Podcast. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me here again.
We look forward to having you back for part 3 on recovery.
Okay.
And I certainly look forward to meeting Sean as well.
She's great.
And that's a wrap for today. We hope that you guys will pay attention to the links that we post with this episode on Baltimore City Voters. The TED Talk is 14 minutes, and it is a very informative 14 minutes, and we hope you take the time to take a look at that TED Talk. Thank you for joining City Voters Live Podcast, and we'll see you on episode 30, part 3 of the coverage of the opioid crisis. Have a good afternoon.